All right. So this morning we're talking about the test tool in Blackboard. The test tool is a very complex tool. It has a lot of moving parts to it. So what we'll be doing today is sort of a general overview of the major moving pieces. After some discussion amongst the online group, we're going to have another webinar doing sort of a deeper dive into the tool. So today will be a brief overview of the big moving parts, and then we can do a deeper dive later on the smaller moving parts. So let's jump into the anatomy of a test. I'm inside my Blackboard course. I'm going to go to my control panel, and I'm going to open up the course tools area, and I'm going to go to scroll all the way down to the area that says tests, surveys, and polls. And it'll bring me to the proper screen, and I'll click on tests. You can see that I've already got some tests built, and I've did that so we can look at some other moving parts. We're going to start just by building a test, so I can show you the different pieces that are involved when you build one. The first part, this will look very similar to a lot of other components in Blackboard that we've used, that you use if you've used any of the other tools. This is very similar. Tatiana, I see that you're asking if I can make the screen larger. Let me see if I can do that for you. Is that a little better?
I was thinking there was a view where your screen would take up most of the screen, and then we would just be one little line of faces.
Oh, that's your Zoom settings. I have everybody set to the side of my screen.
Okay. I was trying to work at it on the top, and I thought by clicking on one of the options on the top that was going to change it. But
I believe if you click on my little frame, you can expand that out and make that your primary window.
Click out of side by side.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing too. Half of the screen and then half.
Yeah. So side by side probably has a check. Just uncheck side by side mode.
And is that my option to do, or is that? Oh, I see it under here. I hadn't seen that before. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I am a somewhat of a Zoom novice, so thank you for that. Okay, so as we were saying, so everything in Blackboard gets a name, and it's a field you always have to fill out. And I'd like to say that the name field is like as if you were creating an email. You want to keep it short, brief, to the point. In the case of our tests, I'm creating a test for my users. I'd give it something very, very directly to the point. If it's a quiz for the week or a quiz or a test on a chapter, give it that name. So, chapter 1 test. The description. So you have these two text boxes. One is for description and one is for instructions. The instructions field is specifically for, instructing your students on what the test is going to involve, how to do it, what they should be prepared to do. The description is just a brief description. Again, the sort of cutting a fine line there. You could include everything in one field if you wish. You want to have the description and instructions in the instruction field. You could go ahead and do so. If you're going to leave one out, I would leave the description out, but always include the instructions, as the students would be able to always refer back to those. Once you fill those two fields out, and again, these are optional, but good practice is to use them both. You always want to give your students more information, not less. So once you fill those out, you go ahead and submit them. And which brings you to the question area. And we're not going to dive into every type of question today, but we'll talk about, I'm going to talk about the general pieces of questions, and I'll show you how to create a couple of different types. To create a question, we come right to the create question drop down, and I'm going to scroll down a little bit here. There are quite a few different options for this. Your major ones: true, false, short answers, essay questions, multiple choice, they're all represented here. And they vary, but there are major components that are similar between them all. So I'll just start with a multiple choice question. So the big things that you'll always have is a title for your question, text for your question. And we scroll down, there's always going to be some sort of options. It's all dependent on the type of question you're creating. And of course, the answers area. Again, that will look different depending on the type of question you're creating. And then after the answers area, you have a feedback area. And this is a great way to put in some basic information for the student to reference if they're reviewing their test or quiz after they've completed it. You have a field for feedback if they've responded correctly to a question, and then you have a field for if they've responded incorrectly to the question. And these will show up if they've answered correctly or not, depending. They don't both show up. They're not always on the screen. It's only if the student, answers correct or not correct. So I'm gonna just scroll back and we'll start creating a question here. So we're gonna give our question a title, and the title is sort of it's not the question itself. Again, it's sort of like a subject of an email. Keep it short. In this case, I'd keep it very short. So, perhaps the question's about Napoleon. And then my text, this is where I want to expound. This is where I want to ask the meat of your question. Where was he? Where was Napoleon exiled to? You shouldn't end your questions in a preposition, but but you can put as much information in here. You can include images, you can include links to things if you wish, or attachments. So your question doesn't have to be a basic question. You can really make it something much larger than that. It really depends on how you want to present your question and what kind of questions you want to ask. I'm keeping it simple for this morning.
Can I interrupt? I'm so sorry.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Maybe this is a deeper dive than you want to do today. I have never used the question title and always kind of wondered what that was for. Is that so that you can do a search later for particular questions, or what is the...
That's a huge part of what the title is for. You're absolutely correct. It's a reference tool. So students really, they see the text of the question. The title is a reference. So if you wish not to include it, you don't have to. It's not a required field. I like to use them just for reference sake. It definitely makes it a lot easier to search your questions when you do include a title. But great question. There are a lot of tools that allow you to search your questions that you create for your tests. I'm going to show you a little piece in a little bit too, as well. All right. Now that I've created my question, I'm going to move to my options. Now, this is a multiple choice question. So these options are specific to my multiple choice. I can have numbering on my answers. You can have no numbering, or you can you have a few options on how you want to present that, and it's really sake of presentation. Perhaps there's guidelines you like to use for your question asking. Maybe you need to present everything with letters. That is really your choice. And then your orientation for your questions, you can have them show in a traditional vertical format, or you can have them appear horizontally across the screen. Again, your choice. I'm going to leave mine vertical. Partial credit, occasionally you could have questions that somehow could gain partial credits. In this particular instance, it's not going to be part of my question. And then the last option is a great one if you want to really kind of mix up things. If you're, it's always a concern that when our students are taking exams online, that they might be able to maybe, in worst case scenarios, cheat off of one another, or they have some sort of key of answers, that sort of thing. You can always show the answers to your multiple choice questions in random order. So it'll just shuffle the questions every time. I mean, not the questions, pardon me, the answers to the questions. It'll shuffle them up. So they don't always appear in the same order every time for every student. It's a nice little way to keep things harder to create keys for and that sort of thing. Also, sometimes we find ourselves inadvertently creating patterns in the way we create our answers to our questions. So having the answers show up in random order, we don't have to worry about creating any sort of pattern. And I'm going to have my answers show up in random order. And then, of course, the multiple choice area for the answers, by default, it's set to show 4 answers. However, there's a drop down, and it'll let you go up to up to 100 different answers. How many you want to display is, again, up to you. 4 is the default. I'm going to leave it at 4. You can't go less than 4, as an FYI. So we'll throw in some answers. When you're creating your answers, there's a little set of radio buttons to the left of the answer boxes. By checking one of them, you have selected the correct answer. So here I'm making answer number 1 the correct answer. So if the students choose this, it'll be marked correct. Any other one will be marked incorrect. And again, these boxes are set up so you can add as much text as you want. You can include videos, images. If you wanted to have a multiple choice answer that was a choice of images, you could do that. So I've created my 4 answers. I've got my first one set as my correct answer. If you have a bunch of answers and you realize one of them is terrible or you made an awful mistake with it, you can use this remove button to remove it completely. And if you go below your number of answers, it'll add a blank field that you can refill in. And then I'll move on to my feedback area. So if the student chooses the correct response, I'm going to reply correct. Now I've entered something kind of superfluous, but you could add a little more beefier information there. You correct. You've chosen. Napoleon was exiled to Elba from the year. I don't remember which years, but from this year to this year. Again, you can include images, links. If you want to have a big thumbs up for your good job, you could put a little icon of a thumb giving a thumbs up. In the incorrect, this is where you really could expound on your answer and give some good information. I'm going to say incorrect. Again, you could expound more if you really want to go into the whys and wherefores of the answer. You can add all that information here, and the student would see it if they've answered incorrectly. We were talking about searching your questions and using the title to do so. This area, categories and keywords, is also a way to tag your questions so you can search through them at a later date. And when I say search your questions, I don't mean just one test. You could search the questions in all your tests. And by using these categories and keywords, you can do that. And this is a very generic way of doing it. It's like hashtags if you're using social media. If you go to search your questions, you could say, okay, I want to search categories for, history. And it doesn't have to be very broad like that. You can narrow it down if you want. And once you enter your category, you just say add, and boom, we've got a category. And I can add multiple categories. The same with the other 3 areas that can be searched: keywords, levels of difficulty, etc. So if you think this is an easy question, you can say easy, and you can put whatever you want in these fields. It's all specific to you and how you want to organize your information. You don't have to use the categories and keywords either. You could leave them blank. And then the instructor notes area, this is all specific to you. Your students don't see this information. It's all for you. If you need to leave yourself a note about the question, perhaps you want to remind yourself about something about the question, this is all relevant just to you. You're the only one who sees this area. Once you finish all your information, you would submit your question. Now, you can, if you plan on making another question of the same type, say submit and create another. So if I'm going to continue making multiple choice questions, I could submit this one and it would automatically launch me into the screen to create another multiple choice question. And again, all your questions have some basic same areas: a name, apologies, a title, the question text. They all have some sort of set of options. They all have an answers area. And they all have the feedback area, as well as the categories and the instructor notes.
Excuse me.
Yes.
When do students see the feedback? Is that when they're taking the test, or is that after the test has been graded?
After the test has been completed. Now, that's actually a good question. I'll show you some options in regards to the feedback. There are a couple of ways you can display it. You can there are a couple ways you can tell it to show the feedback at specific times, and we'll actually jump into that in a little bit, and we'll get into that. I've completed my question here. We're going to submit it. All right, so now it's showing me the questions I've created so far. Here's my multiple choice question that I've created about Napoleon. Here I see the correct answer. Now, I had my options set to display the answers in a random order. It's going to show to me, the instructor, the order I created them in, but when the student takes the test, these will be randomized. So, you know, the correct answer might be at the bottom. Once you've created a question, by default, it'll assign a point value. You can change the point value by clicking on the points on the right side of the screen. You can even mark a question as extra credits. So if you create a question, it's a bonus question, you could select extra credit and it wouldn't be part of the weighted total of the questions. The important thing is if you change the point value of the question, you want to make sure you click the submit to set the new value. Now, if I wanted to add another question to this test that I'm working on, I can do so just by coming back up to create question and moving with another question. I'm going to select true and false. And I just want to show you the similarities and differences between two different question types. Here we're doing true and false. It'll be fairly similar to our multiple choice area. Again, we have a title, we have text area. Our options area for our true false is pretty short. We can show it vertically or horizontally. That's about it. The answers area, because we're just doing a true and false question, we only have two options for our answers, selecting something as true or false. And then the feedback area, did they respond correctly, incorrectly, and the categories, and again, instructor notes. So very similar. Let's do something that's not so similar. I'm going to show you an essay question. We have a title, we have our question text, and then the answers area. Now, the answer, we're doing an essay, so this is not this is not as cut and dry as before. And really, this field for my essay question is really meant to be an example of what I'm looking for an answer. Not so much this is the correct answer. This in my essay doesn't have to be filled out. You can fill it out to give an example to the students of what you're looking for. With essay questions, you can assign a rubric. If you have rubrics already created, you can select one from your library, or you can create a brand new one. So I might be grading using my writing rubric. Once I select my rubric, I submit it, and it adds it to the rubrics area. So they do a good job thinking of the things you want to consider while creating a question. Rubrics appear for pretty much anything that involves a substantial amount of writing. But the area doesn't appear for every question type. Some of that will just take time learning the different types of questions. And in a deeper dive, we'll probably go over creating different types of questions using the test tool. But the rest of it is exactly the same as before. We have categories, we have instructor notes, and then you could submit your question. So those are that's the basic anatomy of a question. So moving right along. So once you have a test created, you can review all your questions in the test by just looking at the test itself. It'll give you a breakdown. Any description or instructions would show up right here. So I'm going to show you a test that has most of this information created. Oh, thank you, Tatiana. Yes, there is an option to show the rubric to the students when you're creating an essay question. So when you add a rubric, it might not necessarily show to the students unless you want it to. So there is an option to do that. I'm going to show you a quiz I created already. I'm going to look at it. As with everything in Blackboard, once you've created something, they all have a contextual menu that you get by clicking a chevron that shows up next to the item. I'm going to edit this quiz I've created. Now here you see that I've filled out my description and instruction fields. My description is this quiz will cover all material in chapters 1 through 3. And I have a bulleted set of instructions. The students can only take the test once. The answers to their questions can only be submitted once. And when they complete it, they can review the quiz to see if their answers were incorrect and why. And the quiz has a 30-minute time limit. I have 4 questions in this test, each one worth 10 points. And there are 4 different kinds. I have a true and false. Here's my question. The sky is blue. The answer, true or false. And then the correct and incorrect feedbacks. My multiple choice question, which galaxy is closest to the Milky Way? The answers, you see by the check mark, I've got which one is the correct. And then my feedback. I have an essay question. And then I also have a fill in the blank question. So I didn't show this one earlier, but the question is the stars are primarily composed of, and I have 2 blanks. And then the answers are helium and hydrogen. And again, with the fill in the blank, it has specific options. I'm going to just jump into edit this question to show you those. It has a title. It has question text, just like we're used to. The answer area. With fill in the blanks, you can have 2 or more answers for the students to give. When you create your answers, there's simple text boxes that you enter the different answers into. And there's these drop downs where you can say contains exact match and pattern match. So these are different ways of saying, well, either I want exactly this thing, or in case you're worried about spelling errors or something like that, you could say pattern match. So they might not spell helium correctly, but I've got all the letters there. So the system's somewhat smart enough to recognize a pattern like that, this looks like helium, this should be marked as correct. Anytime you review tests, it's especially with something like this, with where the students are entering their answers by hand, it's always a good idea to review something if it's marked automatically correct or incorrect. I have these set to exact match because I want them to spell correctly. You could also mark whether the answer is case sensitive or not. So if you're teaching a grammar class and it's very specific in the way they need to be answered, you can actually have it be marked case sensitive. And then the rest of it is everything else we're used to seeing: feedback, categories, and notes. So here is a test I've already created. What we're going to do is we're going to deploy this. So when you create a test, it goes into your test bank area. Even though it's been created, hasn't been published to your students yet. And what you have to do is deploy it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my course content area. So here I have a test. It's already been deployed. It's right now, it's hidden from my students, but it has been deployed. I'm going to add another test to this area. So I'm going to come up to my course content buttons. I'm going to go to assessments, and I'm going to say I want to select a test. Now, it will show me the tests I have created that are ready for deploying that have not been deployed yet. I could select one of these. In this case, I'm going to select the week 1 quiz. However, you could also click on the button that says create, and you can create a whole test from scratch right from this area. It's better to create your tests ahead of time. That way, if you need to stop working on it and come back to it, you won't lose anything in your setup. But if it's going to be something quick and easy that you know you can do very rapidly, then using the create button would be, an appropriate way to do it. I'm going to select my week 1 quiz. And now we have our test options area. Now, these options are specific to this deployment of the test. So you'll see it automatically populates the name with the name of the test that I created. I can change it if I wish. I'm going to leave it the same, but you could change it if you wish. It always lets you select the color that the name of the test will appear in. I leave it as black for ease of reading. You want to be careful if you change the colors. You don't want to use a color that's difficult for people to read, or that might not get read by a screen reader or some other accessibility tool. There's a description area. Again, it's our standard text box editor tool. You can put, again, any information you want in here. You can include images, a video. You have your basic formatting tools. My description is fairly short. This quiz is going to cover all material, chapters 1 through 3. Here it displays my description so I can see what it'll look like. Now, I have the option to show the test description to students before they begin the test. I like to use this if I have a description. I like to use it. That way, it will just remind them what they're about to do. Here's my instructions area as I had created them earlier. And again, I want to show that to my students. Your instructions will appear on the test before they've clicked on it, as it appears in their content area. But once they click on it, if you don't check off these buttons, they won't see these instructions again. I like to include them because I want to remind the students what the parameters of the test will be as they're taking it. You have an option to display the test in the same window that they're working in or in a new window. This is really a matter of choice for you. I'm going to set it to no, just to make things less confusing for my students, but so if you trust them, you can use yes. It'll open a new window with the test in it. Sometimes people get confused and they'll close a pop-up window, or they might have a pop-up blocker stopping the window from opening. And I don't want to risk anything like that, so I'm going to leave it set to no. Then your availability options. This is very similar to a lot of other items that you create in Blackboard. Do we want to make it available, immediately available to the students? I'm going to say yes. You can deploy a test and have it hidden from the students until you go in and decide to set it to be visible to them, but it'll be deployed and ready to go. This is a nice feature. You can add a new announcement for this test. What that does is it creates announcement in your announcements area. And if you have your announcement set to email your students when you create a new announcement, it'll also create an email. Now this area is where you can allow your students to take the test multiple times. There are a variety of ways of setting this up. If you want to allow multiple attempts, you can allow them unlimited number of attempts, or you can limit how many attempts they can take. When you allow multiple attempts, you have this option to set your score attempts. And what this does is, if you allow multiple attempts, there are different ways to say, use this score as opposed to the other scores. You can say, use the highest grade that they've gotten, use the last attempt that they made, use the lowest grade that they got, or only the first grade attempt. Or you could say, well, they took it multiple times, let's give them a score of the average, average grades. So depending on how you want to do it, that's up to you. There's different ways you can use the multiple attempts area. I am not going to allow my students to take multiple attempts on this particular test, so I'm going to uncheck that. And when I uncheck it, you'll see that the score attempts using field goes gray, because that's part of the multiple attempts area. I am going to check off forced completion, which means once they start the test, if they stop, it'll automatically submit their attempt. That once they start it, they have to finish it. You don't have to check this. If you don't, it'll allow the students to answer some of the questions, save what they've done so far, and come back to the test to finish it at a later date. I will force completion. As per my instructions, I'm also going to set a timer. I'm going to set my time to 30 minutes. You can, if you have a timer, tell it to auto submit. And what that will do is, once the timer hits 0, whether the student has finished completing the test or not, if you have the auto submit on, it'll automatically submit what they've done so far and essentially boot the student out of the test. Otherwise, if you leave it off, they have to click the submit button. If they run past their time, there'll be a message that they cannot continue. They have to submit. I'm actually going to turn it on, since I know that I want them to complete in 30 minutes. The display after and until. This is a nice way to create any content you create in Blackboard. You have this option. You can use these to create your content ahead of time and have it automatically display after a certain date and time, or be displayed until a certain date and time, or both. It's very handy tools. Otherwise, if you've set the content to be immediately available and you don't use these options, it'll just be there for the students to do. If you say don't display it until a certain date, even if you set this initial availability, make available to students to yes, if it's not the particular date and time you've entered here, it'll be hidden from the students until that date and time come around. You can password a test. How you pass that password onto your students is up to you. But if a test is passworded, they won't, when they click on the test to start it, they'll get a pop-up asking for the password. If they don't enter the correct password, they cannot begin the test. I'm not going to password this particular test, but you can use anything in here. If you do password your tests, I would keep the passwords relatively easy. You don't want to create more trouble for yourself in the long run. Now, this test availability exceptions. Occasionally you have a student or a group of students who, for some reason, are going to be exempt from your from the rules you've already created about when and how the students can take a test. By using this area, you can add them here and they will not be constrained by the timer. They will not be constrained by other things like that. If you have a student with special needs or something like that, you can add them here. When you click add a user, it'll show you the users in your course. I only have one. But if you have a lot of users, you can select them from a list and submit their names, and it would add them to this area. Likewise, you could create a group of students. There's a group tool where you can organize your students into groups. And if you put a bunch of students in a particular group, you could select that whole group to be exempt from the timer or the forced completion options of the test. Your due dates. You do not have to set a due date. The test will, if you don't, the test will just be there until the student completes it. If you do set a due date, again, it depends on how you set the due date. If you set a due date with just a date and time, the test will still be available for the student to complete. Even if it's past due, it'll be marked late when you receive their attempt. You can select this option to not allow them to start the test if the due date has passed. If you do that, the only way for them to take the test after the due date is for you to go in and allow them to do so.
Rob?
Yes.
So did all of this we just went through is to deploy the test?
This is deploying the test, correct?
Okay.
Like I said, there's a lot of moving parts to tests, and I'm trying to hit the big ones. So we created one. This is deploying it. There's a self-assessment area. You essentially have two options in this area. You can include the test, the grade center score calculations. If you uncheck this, it won't appear in your grade center. It won't be part of your calculations. I definitely want this part of my grade center. You can also hide the results of the test completely from you and the grade center. There are different reasons to use this option. I am I am not going to use it for this particular test. And then we were talking earlier about the feedback. So this is where we set how and when the students see their feedback. You set your when column to one of these options. After submission means after the test has been completed and submitted. You can do a one-time view, so they see the feedback once and they can't see it again. You can set the feedback to show on a specific date or after the due date, or after the availability end dates of the test. Or you can set it to the feedback to only show after the test has been graded officially by you. I'm just going to say it after submission. You show the score per question. You can so you can show the feedback by showing all answers. You can say only show the feedback for correct, or show the feedback for submitted answers. Show your feedback, and you can also say show incorrect questions. So my advice for these using this area is it might take you a few tries to get the right combination of things. Everything has an informational pop-up when you hover over them. I would just recommend maybe trying it a couple of different ways just to kind of get the feel of how things will appear to your students. Myself, I'm going to use after submission, score per question, show. I'm going to show my feedback for all answers. Here's my feedback I'm showing, and I'm showing the incorrect questions as well as the correct questions. You can add additional parameters like show on a specific date, after the due date, and after availability end date, and after attempt. So you could combine after submission with one of the date specific options. If there's, for some reason, you just need to use both, you can. And then, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just interject here, just in agreement to what you said, to try out various things, not necessarily, I guess, within the same semester, maybe, but I actually allow my students to retake a quiz 3 different times. So back there earlier when you were showing that process,
yep.
I don't give them feedback for their responses because I allow them to retake it. So obviously everybody would go through, right? Okay, didn't do well, redo it and get everything perfect. So, but just now, this semester, either for what I'm teaching now or this fall, I can't remember, I am going ahead and allowing the answers to be shown after the due date. So just agreeing what you said, I'm not try it a little differently, although I'm still allowing them 3 times to take it. I'm going to give them the answers, because that's the part I've never liked, is you got it wrong. Well, in an online, you know, unless you have synchronous, you don't get to tell them
right
or why. So
right, and you bring up a good point. If you allow multiple attempts for a quiz, if you don't want to give them the answers to their attempt until they're done completely, then yes, you definitely want to use something like show after the due date, or after a particular, or after you've graded it, officially, that kind of thing. Yeah, no, that's a great point. If you don't set those kinds of options, and you have the feedback show after submission on a multiple attempt test, then they will see the answers. And if they have attempts that they can make again, then they might have all the answers already. And we've kind of defeated the purpose of the test. Yes. Great point. And then the test presentation area, this is where where we set whether they take the test all at once, or if they're presented the questions one at a time. So all at once shows all the questions all on one screen. If there's a lot of questions, obviously they'll have to scroll and answer each one. But there's only one screen. When they reach the bottom, they can hit submit and submit their answers. You can set the option to show the questions one at a time. If you do so, you have this option to prohibit backtracking, which means if you select this, if you're showing the questions one at a time, once they answer a question, they can't go back to a previous question that they've already answered. They have to continue going forward. They can never go back. If you leave this unchecked, then they can go back and change an answer to a question they've already answered. And then you have a nice feature to randomize your questions. Again, this goes to, we don't want to create a pattern. Perhaps you have multiple choice tests and you just want to keep it fresh, avoid people being able to make answer keys, that sort of thing. You can randomize your questions so they won't appear in the order you created them. It'll mix them up, shuffle them together. Once you finish setting all your options, now we are ready to deploy. I'm going to submit. Now in my course content area, I scroll down, here's my week 1 quiz. It's been deployed. I like to point out that different types of items in Blackboard have different icons associated with them. The tests and quizzes will have this piece of paper with an X and check mark and pencil on them that indicates this is a test or quiz, depending on the case. Up here, I have some other items. These are assignments. They have a different icon associated with them. I have a different test that's been deployed, but you can see here, it is still hidden from my students. If you have something like that you have to go and turn on for the students to see, again, you could click its menu and you can go to edit the test options. If you edit the test, that'll take you to the area where the questions are and you can edit the questions. If you want to edit the options for displaying the test to the students, or change timer settings or anything like that, you want to edit your test options. And here, you'll see all my stuff is filled out. I just want to make sure I make this available to my students now, and I'll submit my changes. And when I come back, I can see now that the test is ready to be taken. Okay.
Rob, wasn't there a section that you just showed us that said make available?
Yes. Yeah, I'll show you again. I click the contextual menu next to my test here, and I'm going to edit my test options.
Okay.
And I'm looking at all the things I've already set up: my name, the link description, all the different. Here's my availability area, and it was this first one here where it says make available to students was set to no. I just went in and I set it to yes, and then I hit submit. You could actually change any setting in the test options area. So if you go to deploy and you realize that you have to add an exception to the timer, you could add a user exception after the fact. If you realize you didn't slap on a due date, you could do that. Well, all of that is editable again. And then you just submit your changes, and they take effect immediately.
What happens when you use just the drop down? So hover on your chevron there.
Sure.
Isn't there?
Oh, there is. Yes, you're absolutely correct. There is a make available, make unavailable, and that just toggles that setting, that particular setting for you without having to go and edit the test options. I just wanted to show you that you can go in and edit any option after the fact. But yes, you're absolutely correct. You can just use this toggle here. Now my test is unavailable, but I could go and make it available again. So
Okay.
yes, you are correct.
I started thinking, uh-oh, maybe I did something wrong.
No.
That was my question, Deb. Thank you.
That was a good point. I did the long way. So I know we're running a little long. I just wanted to show a grade center view of an attempt. I'm going to go to my grade center. And I have
And I apologize. I'm going to have to run. I have something else.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us today. So here I have a student. They created a test. It was a one-question test. Here's their grade, which was automatically calculated because it was a true-false test. I'm going to click on the drop-down, and I'm going to view grade details. Now, if you have a test that's been submitted and it doesn't have a grade yet, you have to go in and finish grading it. And what I'm doing right now is pretty much exactly the same. You go and you view you'll view the attempt itself. And it'll show up here. You have a quick way to cycle through your students if you have multiple attempts to grade. And here it shows their responses to the questions. Now there's another way. Here's another way you can send feedback to your students. You can enter it right here in this feedback and notes for attempt. So you review the responses the student made. If for some reason you decide to give them partial credit, maybe it was a short answer question and they got most of the information there, but not all of it, you can give them a different amount of points out of the total by changing this box in the upper right next to each question. You can add additional feedback to the student. And then you can add extra notes. The notes are for you. Perhaps you want to keep an eye on the student. You're worried about their performance so far, or maybe you're even worried about some plagiarism going on. You can make notes that you can review later about the student and their attempt. And once you finish, you hit submit. And when the student reviews their grading information, when they look at their My Grades, they'll see that information appear to, on their review sheet. Okay. Let's see, we have a couple of questions in the, if you show all the questions all at once, I'm assuming that's a different question from randomized. So when you show if you show the questions all at once, but you have randomized questions toggled, it'll still show every question. They'll just be in a different order. Does that answer your question, Joe?
Yeah, so they can do both at the same time. Then.
Correct. Correct.
Okay, yeah, that was the question. Yeah, thank you.
How do you upload prepared questions? Okay. So Suzanne, that's a great question about uploading prepared questions or questions from another resource. I think that would be part of another webinar. Like I said, I think we're going to have another webinar that does slightly deeper dive into some of the tools with creating tests. Once we started putting this together, we realized there was a lot of information to pass on. So today was really an overview, but I can answer your question offline, and I'll send you an answer to that. Okay. Any more questions?
Hi, Rob. You probably answered the one on the rubric, but if you click on that on the right-hand side when you're adding a rubric, then that becomes visible to students.
Yes. Let me. I'll give an example real quick here of what Tatiana is talking about. Actually, I want to go back to my test area. Here's my week 1 quiz. Okay, so here's my essay. I'm going to edit this. So here I have an essay question. I have a rubric assigned to it. And right now my rubric is not set to show to the students. I've tagged it, but really I'm going to be the only one seeing the rubric. If that's not helpful to your students, if you want them to be able to see it as well, you can toggle these options on the right side. There are different ways to show the rubric to the students. You can show it with the scores involved in the different categories. You can say, yes, show them the rubric, but without the scoring. And then you can say, show them the rubric, but only after the essay has been graded. So I'm going to set it to yes with the rubric scores. And then once you submit your changes, that's been set. And here's here, I've edited my question successfully. Does that answer your question, Tatiana?
Yes, thank you very much.
All right, thank you for pointing that out. Yeah.
Rob, this is
Yes.
Jim. Could you
Hey, Jim.
follow up with that? Could I see from a student's perspective what that essay question now looks like when you have
Absolutely. Let me log out of my instructor account. I'll jump in my student role. I'm going to go into, and look, I have an announcement that there's a new test. I'm going to jump into my course. I'm going to go to my course content area. Here's my week 1 quiz with the rubric that I just edited. Now, as a student, here I come in. Here's my week 1 quiz. I have a description of the test. Here are my instructions. And then I see all my settings that it's a time test of 30 minutes. My time setting, it'll save and submit automatically once the time expires. And then once I start the test, I have to finish it. I can't stop halfway through. So I'm going to begin. And I've got my questions set up to show one at a time. So I have my description instructions set to show all the time. So they're up here. If it's annoying for the student, they can always minimize this area. And then they only see it if they toggle it back open again. And you can see right here, I have a timer set. They have a countdown. They're always aware of what's happening. Again, though, if it's annoying to them, they can hide the timer. Some students might have issues with anxiety or something like that, and timers make them anxious, so they can hide that so they don't have to worry about it. So, and I also get a warning that moving to another question will save this response. Great. So here I had my question set to be randomized. My essay question was third in my list. I just happened to get this one first. Here's my essay question. I could put my response, my essay inside this text field. Here I have two buttons. One is to save my answer. The other one is to view the rubric. And when I do that, does everybody see the rubric pop up? A rubric will pop up. They'll be able to review it. This particular rubric is not particularly well defined. I just threw something together to have there, but they get a pop-up. They can review it. They can exit it, but it'll always be there if they need to go back to it again. They'll answer my question. I'll save my answer, and when they click Save Answer, they'll get a little check mark saved button. I could add more to it and click Save again, and then I'm going to move on to the next question. Here are my fill in the blanks. My multiple choice. And my true and false. Now I'm going to save and submit all my answers. I'll get a pop-up that says, you know, here's my test submission confirmation. If I don't want to submit it, I can cancel, but I can click OK to continue. And now I see, you know, all the how long it took me to do, the name of the test, etc. Down in the lower right-hand corner, I have this OK button. Once I click that, now I get a review of my test. Now, the first question was an essay, so that will needs grading. Here's my question 2. I responded incorrectly, so I didn't get any points for that. Question 3, I got right, 10 out of 10 points. Question 4, I got wrong, no points. And then you can see, here's my response feedback. My essay question has none, but here's my response feedback for my incorrect answer. Stars are primarily composed of helium and hydrogen. My response feedback, I have a correct answer on this one, and it says correct, Andromeda's closest galaxy to the Milky Way, etc. Once I finish reviewing, I can say okay. That is the student view of what it looks like for them. Any other questions?
I'm assuming we can make up our own rubrics.
Yes. Yes, you can build yourself a library of rubrics in Blackboard. And then that's what you have to choose from whenever you click that button to include a rubric.
Just to clarify, there are a couple of rubrics that are standard. So we do have a standard discussion rubric and a standard writing one. So those should be available to you when you're working on creating a course. I think they show up on the drop down.
On the drop down? Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tatiana. We will be doing a webinar on creating rubrics as well. So, you know, feel free to come by that, and we'll be able to do a deeper dive and see how to create them to include in your own library of rubrics. Okay. Any further questions? Okay. Well,
Excellent. Thank you, Rob.
thank you, everybody. Yeah, thank you for attending today. We'll be doing more of these webinars. We'll probably be adding another test tool webinar in the near future. So hopefully an email will be going out about that to make you aware when it will be. Also, if you have technical issues that you run into or technical questions you need answered, you can always email me at rhawk@nec.edu, or you can attend one of my Zoom drop-in sessions on Tuesdays from 6 to 7 and Thursdays 10 to 11. If you have questions about good course design or pedagogy or anything like that, you can always contact one of our instructional designers and set up a meeting with them, and they'll be happy to walk you through good practices.
Very
All
good.
right.
Very
All
good.
right.
Well,
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you again.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks.